My name is Gerald Finch. I am 76 years old, and I live alone in a modest, aging colonial house on the east side of Clarksville, Tennessee, the kind of place that creaks at night and smells faintly of dust and something older, maybe memory. For most of my life, I was a history teacher at the local high school. Not a remarkable one, not a legendary one, just the kind of teacher students forget the moment they graduate. I used to joke that I specialized in forgotten revolutions and underappreciated treaties. Maybe it was prophetic. I retired 14 years ago, shortly before my wife, Mary Ann, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She was gone within 10 months. Fast. Brutal. There are some pains that sit inside you like stones. No matter how many years pass, no matter how many times you tell yourself you've learned to carry them. After she died, I stopped opening the second bedroom door. Her knitting was still in the basket by the window, half finished. A little green cardigan she never got to finish for our granddaughter. Some days I'd sit on the edge of the bed and hold that unfinished thing in my hands like I could stitch time backward. But mostly, I stayed downstairs. I made coffee in silence. I read the obituaries first thing in the morning. Out of some old man habit of tracking the exits, I didn't go out much. The garden Mary Ann had loved turned wild. The roses overtaken by kudzu and ivy, and the bird bath filled with mosquito larvae each summer. The neighbors stopped waving, and I let the world grow quiet around me. My only son, Jeffrey, would call once every couple of weeks at first. Those early months, there was a sort of guilty tenderness in his voice, like he was handling me with oven mitts. Then the calls became less frequent. He always had a new meeting, a client emergency, a business trip, something important that took precedence over talking to an old man with too many opinions and too little use left in him. His wife, Lisa, a stern woman with a clipped voice and expensive perfume, never called. She never liked me much, not since that first Thanksgiving when I had the audacity to criticize her overpriced, undercooked turkey. She'd smiled then, one of those long smiles with teeth and no warmth, and I understood we would never be close. Jeffrey and Lisa live in Franklin now, about 2 hours away, in one of those gated communities where the garbage bins are hidden underground, and every mailbox looks like it was designed by NASA. Their daughter, Sophie, used to visit me when she was little. We'd walk to the park, feed ducks, build elaborate cities out of dominoes and blocks. She had the kind of laugh that made the neighbors' dogs wag their tails. Then, as she got older, she stopped coming. Lisa said she was too busy with dance class and test prep and social activities. I got it. Kids grow up. But I kept sending her birthday cards every year with a little cash folded into them. I never got a reply. Not a thank you. Not a call. Nothing. Financially, I've always been careful. Mary Ann and I weren't wealthy, but we were prudent. We didn't vacation in Europe or drive luxury cars, but we had no debts, and we saved. By the time I retired, we had a tidy little sum tucked away, enough to last a quiet life. After her death, I kept it safe, until Jeffrey came asking for help. His company was expanding. He needed seed money. I gave him $30,000. Then a year later, it was for Sophie's tuition at a private college. Then for a car. Then for some sort of tax issue. Each time he promised to pay it back. Each time I said it wasn't necessary. He was my son. What was money for, if not for family? But something shifted about 3 years ago. Jeffrey started talking to me like a man who'd been given an unwanted chore. I'd ask about Sophie, and he'd say she was doing her own thing now. He'd cut the conversation short, always a meeting to run to. Lisa, on the rare occasions I saw her, barely made eye contact. She started dropping hints about assisted living. "It would be good for you to be around people your own age, Gerald," she said once, handing me a pamphlet with glossy pictures of gray-haired seniors playing bingo and smiling like lottery winners. I laughed then. I shouldn't have. It wasn't a joke. That winter, I slipped on the front porch and sprained my wrist. I didn't call anyone. I didn't want to be a burden. I made do with frozen peas and ibuprofen. But word must have gotten around because 2 weeks later, Jeffrey showed up unannounced with Lisa. They sat me down in the living room like I was a student who'd been caught cheating. They told me it was time to think about the future, about safety, about dignity. Lisa said, "You're not as sharp as you used to be, Gerald." I looked at her then, and for a moment, I could see the contempt behind her concern. Jeffrey stayed mostly quiet, nodding along like a man who'd already signed a contract. They had a place picked out, one of those luxury assisted living centers, heated floors, meal plans, daily fitness sessions. Lisa said, "We've already scheduled the move for next month. The paperwork's mostly done." I blinked. What paperwork? And that's when they told me they'd used the power of attorney I had given Jeffrey years ago, when he was helping me sort out Marianne's hospital bills. "It's for your own good," he said. "You'll thank us later." I didn't argue. Not then. I didn't know how. I sat there, staring at the fireplace where Marianne's photo still rested. Something in my chest felt cold and caved in. This was my life now. The people I'd loved most were packaging me up like a worn-out appliance. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice whispered that maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't sharp anymore. Maybe I should just stay quiet and obey. But later that night, when I was alone again in the kitchen, stirring tea with my good hand and watching the steam rise, I remembered something Marianne used to say whenever I doubted myself. Don't let the people who know the least about you define the shape of your life. And I knew then I couldn't go quietly. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't done yet. It was late March when the official letter arrived. Thick, cream-colored envelope, government seal embossed in the upper left corner, addressed to me with chilling formality, Mr. Gerald W. Finch. At first I thought it was just another reminder about taxes, or perhaps some bureaucratic nonsense about Medicare enrollment. But as I slit the envelope open with the edge of an old butter knife and unfolded the packet, my hands began to shake. Inside were documents, legal ones, with unfamiliar signatures, typed statements, and phrases that made my stomach turn: voluntary transfer, durable medical power of attorney, long-term residential placement approval. The letter stated, with cool, bureaucratic detachment, that I had been officially approved for residency at the Elmridge Care Community, a premier assisted living and memory support facility, beginning the following week. I was stunned. I hadn't filled out any applications. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't agreed to anything. And yet, the letter spoke as if I had done so willingly, as if I were a man who had sat down and thoughtfully handed over the reins of his life. I tried calling Jeffrey immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice trembling not from fear, but from disbelief, asking what this was about and demanding an explanation. No response. I paced the house for hours, rereading the documents, trying to make sense of them. The next morning, Lisa showed up unannounced, dressed sharply in a gray blazer and slacks, like she was ready to argue a corporate merger. She walked in without asking, took a seat at my kitchen table and said, "We were going to talk you through it, Gerald, but it's better this way. Less stress." Less stress? For whom, I wondered. She went on to explain that after my recent episodes, a term she used casually, though I had no idea what she meant, it had become clear that I could no longer live alone. I asked her what episodes she was talking about. She hesitated, then said, "The forgetfulness, the confusion. Remember when you called Jeffrey last month and didn't remember why? That happened once." I had been half asleep, groggy. She made it sound like I'd wandered the highway naked. Then she added, "And when you left the stove on overnight, that could have burned down the whole house." But I hadn't left the stove on. I hadn't cooked anything that day. I told her she was mistaken. Her eyes narrowed, voice sharpening like a blade, and she said, "We have to make decisions based on what's safest for everyone." Everyone, not just me. That word caught in my throat. She handed me a small folder. "These are the intake papers for Elmridge. Jeffrey and I already handled the payment. You're covered. It's a very good place." She stood adjusting her blazer like she had just finished a successful pitch and said, "We'll come help you pack this weekend. It'll be a big adjustment, but you'll thank us later." I didn't thank her. I didn't speak. I just watched her walk out of the house as if it already wasn't mine. That evening, I pulled out an old tin box where I kept copies of my important documents: will, insurance policy, Mary Ann's death certificate, the power of attorney I had signed years ago, giving Jeffrey temporary control to help with medical claims and hospital billing after Mary Ann passed. I read the fine print. It was supposed to be limited in scope and time-bound. It had a termination clause. But the version included in the Elmridge packet was different. It was a general power of attorney, durable, wide-reaching, giving Jeffrey near total authority over my legal, financial, and medical affairs. I didn't remember signing this version. My signature was there, but it didn't look right. The loops were off. The tail of the F in Finch lacked the peculiar little hook I always added out of habit since high school. I stared at that signature for a long time. I wasn't certain it was forged, but I wasn't sure it was mine either. And that doubt filled me with something deeper than fear. It filled me with betrayal. 2 days later, a representative from Elmridge called to confirm transportation details. Apparently, they had a shuttle scheduled to pick me up on Monday morning at 10 a.m. I hadn't packed. I hadn't agreed. I told the woman on the phone that there had been a mistake, that I wasn't moving anywhere. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Mr. Finch, we have your signed authorization and placement documents. Your son has been coordinating this transition for months." Months. That was the moment the floor under my life began to shift. I realized this hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision. They had been planning this. Not because I was frail or confused, not because I had asked for help, but because it suited them. It made me disposable. Easier to manage, easier to silence. I was in the way of something. What exactly, I didn't yet understand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, surrounded by Mary Ann's photographs, my books, my old teaching awards, tokens of a life that apparently no longer belonged to me. I began to suspect that Jeffrey and Lisa weren't just trying to put me somewhere safe. I started reviewing my recent bank statements and found 2 large withdrawals I hadn't made. I noticed that one of my credit cards had been used for a purchase in Franklin, a spa weekend for 2. I hadn't been to Franklin in 6 years. My hands trembled as I logged into my online banking and saw that access to one of my savings accounts had been altered. Secondary authorization had been added. Jeffrey. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place like snapping bones. This wasn't about my safety. It was about access to money, to control, to convenience. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I dug out the dog-eared business card of Martin Levitt, an old friend of mine from Rotary Club who practiced elder law in Nashville. He was semi-retired, mostly helped old-timers with wills and Medicaid claims, but he had once helped Mary Ann and me draft our living trust. I called him, hoping he'd remember me. When he answered, I barely recognized his voice, gravelly, slower. But the moment I said my name, he lit up. "Gerald, I thought you'd dropped off the planet." I told him what had happened Every detail, from the letter to the signature to the strange banking activity, he listened in silence. Then he said, "I want you to come in, first thing tomorrow. Bring every piece of paper you have." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Direction. Not hope exactly, but momentum. I started gathering everything. I printed out bank statements, credit card records, copies of the original power of attorney and the suspicious one. I photocopied the Elm Ridge letter and the supposed intake forms. I found a legal pad and began making notes, lists, timelines. I felt like a man fighting for his own name. That night, for the first time in ages, I slept soundly. Not because I believed everything would be fine, but because I had finally decided I wouldn't go quietly. I wasn't going to sit in a room painted beige with piped-in music and let my world be rewritten. They thought they could strip me of my voice. They were wrong. I would make them listen. The following morning, I woke early with a sense of urgency thrumming through my chest, dressed in clothes that still held the scent of mothballs from a closet I hadn't properly opened in months, and made the 2-hour drive to Nashville with the packet of documents in a battered leather briefcase Marianne had bought me when I retired. As I drove along the highway, every familiar exit and roadside diner I passed felt strangely distant, as if I were moving through someone else's memories, not my own. When I reached Martin Levitt's law office, tucked between a hair salon and an old tax firm on a quiet street lined with tired oak trees, he greeted me at the door himself, a little thinner than I remembered, balder, his shoulders slightly hunched, but his eyes were just as sharp as they'd been when he helped Marianne and me plan our estate years ago. We sat down in his cluttered office, and I laid out every document, every suspicious letter, every printout, spreading them across his desk like a crime scene. Martin didn't speak for a long time as he studied each paper, flipping through with increasing intensity, occasionally muttering under his breath or making small notes in the margins of a yellow legal pad. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim. "Gerald, I'm going to be blunt. They're building a case that you're no longer competent, medically and financially. They're using the revised power of attorney, banking activity, and that pending Elm Ridge placement to make it official. If they push this in court, they might try to file for full conservatorship." I sat there, stunned, the term echoing through me like a church bell. Conservatorship. The legal death of self-determination. "But I'm not incompetent," I said, hearing the desperation in my voice. "You and I both know that," Martin replied. "But they've crafted a narrative. They'll argue mental decline, confusion, risky behavior. It doesn't take much for a judge to err on the side of caution, especially when a well-dressed son and daughter-in-law present themselves as concerned caregivers." I wanted to stand up and shout. I wanted to break something. Instead, I swallowed that rage and asked, "What can we do?" Martin leaned back, steepled his fingers, and said, "First, we get you evaluated by a licensed geriatric psychiatrist, someone the court will recognize. We'll establish your cognitive baseline. Will stay decisively. Next, we challenge the revised power of attorney. If we can show the signature was coerced or manipulated, we can invalidate it. Then we go after the financial activity. If they moved money without your consent, we may have grounds for a fraud complaint. It won't be fast, Gerald, but we can fight." His calm gave me strength. It was the first time in weeks that someone spoke to me like I was still a man, not a liability. That afternoon, I met with the psychiatrist Martin had recommended, a serious, middle-aged woman named Dr. Carla Brenner. She administered a battery of tests: memory recall, executive function, problem-solving, orientation, attention. I passed all of them. Some were harder than others, but I could feel my mind rallying, not just to defend itself, but to assert itself. I was not confused. I was not declining. I was angry, and anger had always sharpened my focus. When Dr. Brenner looked up from her clipboard and said, "You're fully competent, Mr. Finch." No signs of dementia or cognitive impairment, I nearly cried, not out of relief, but because part of me had feared that maybe, somehow, they were right, and I had started to fade without knowing it. With the evaluation complete, Martin filed an immediate injunction to prevent my placement at Elmridge and began drafting the paperwork to revoke the new power of attorney. He also submitted a request for financial records from the bank to verify the unauthorized transactions. Over the next week, we built our case brick by brick. Meanwhile, I returned to Clarksville and tried to live normally, though nothing about life felt normal anymore. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my vision, every quiet moment felt charged with suspicion. I changed the locks on my house. I canceled my debit card and notified the bank of potential fraud. I called Sophie, my granddaughter, but the number went to voicemail. I left a message, simple, heartfelt, asking her to call me back. She never did. Then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, a white SUV pulled into my driveway. I watched from the window as Jeffrey stepped out, followed by Lisa, both dressed in business casual, as if they were about to attend a board meeting. I didn't open the door immediately. I let them knock 3 times before I finally unlocked it and stood silently in the frame, saying nothing. Jeffrey gave me that same weary smile he'd mastered in high school when he was caught skipping class. "Dad," he said, as if nothing unusual had happened, "can we come in?" I let them in without a word and watched as they sat down on my couch, arranging themselves carefully, like diplomats in enemy territory. Lisa spoke first. "We heard you've been making arrangements, lawyers, evaluations, injunctions." She made it sound like I'd committed treason. I nodded. "I have. Because I'm not moving to Elmridge. And I'm not letting you take over my life." Jeffrey looked wounded, the kind of wounded that's rehearsed. "Dad, we were trying to help. You've been alone for so long. You've had some lapses." I shook my head. Don't you dare lie to my face." He flinched, and for the first time, I saw something crack in his composure. Lisa stepped in. "Gerald, you're blowing this out of proportion. We only stepped in because we were concerned. That power of attorney, you signed that." I stared at her. "Did I? When? Where? Show me a video, a witness, because that signature doesn't look like mine." Lisa's lips thinned, but she didn't answer. Jeffrey sighed. "This is becoming combative. It doesn't have to be. Look, we already put down a deposit for Elmridge. You can't expect us to—" I cut him off. "You spent my money, not yours. You never asked. You never cared. You just acted." Lisa's tone shifted, grew colder. "We had every legal right." I laughed then, a short, bitter sound. "Not anymore. That document is being challenged. And your little scheme is unraveling." Jeffrey stood up. "You're not thinking clearly, Dad. You're emotional. This is why you need help." I looked up at him, decades of disappointment rising like bile in my throat. "I needed help when your mother died. I needed help when I sat alone in this house for years. Not now. Not like this. You want control, not to help." Lisa grabbed her bag. "We'll see what the court says." As they walked out, I said quietly, "You're not the son I raised." Jeffrey didn't look back. Later that night, I found that someone had tried to log into my online bank account unsuccessfully 3 times. I called the bank and had them freeze everything. I didn't know whether to feel fury or fear, maybe both. They weren't done. They were escalating, and I knew then that this fight wasn't about misunderstanding or misguided concern. It was about ownership. They thought they owned my choices, my money, my narrative, and I intended to prove them wrong. It was 1 week after Jeffrey and Lisa's visit when the true center of the storm hit. Not with a shout, not with another confrontation, but with a letter. A thick, official envelope once again, this time delivered by certified mail and signed for by me in my own front yard with shaking fingers. Inside was a petition filed in probate court. Jeffrey and Lisa Finch, my own son and daughter-in-law, were formally requesting full conservatorship over me, citing mental deterioration, increasing incidents of confusion, poor decision-making, and, most painfully, a documented pattern of financial irresponsibility. They attached a set of declarations, sworn statements by themselves, and astonishingly, by a physician I didn't recognize, claiming I had exhibited early-stage cognitive decline, consistent with dementia. There were claims that I had forgotten appointments, sent duplicate checks to utility companies, failed to recall names of friends, fabrications, distortions, small mundane errors twisted into a noose. My hands trembled as I held the pages, and for a moment I felt the terrifying vertigo of being rewritten, of having your own life torn out of your hands by people who had once kissed your forehead goodnight. It wasn't just betrayal now. It was annihilation of self, systematic, strategic, and cold. I drove straight to Martin Levitt's office, burst through the door with no appointment, the petition clutched in my fist like a death warrant. He read it quickly, mouth tightening into a grim line. "They're escalating," he muttered. "They're trying to preempt our case by going directly to the court and getting you declared incompetent. If they succeed, they'll gain legal authority over your finances, your property, even where you live. Everything." I sat in the chair across from his desk, suddenly winded, as if my entire body had collapsed inward under the weight of their intentions. "Can they win?" I asked, not knowing if I wanted the answer. "Not if we move fast," he replied. "We already have your evaluation from Dr. Brenner. That's gold. Now we need corroborating statements, people who've interacted with you, recent witnesses to your clarity of mind, your ability to function independently. Neighbors, colleagues, your doctor, anyone." That night, I walked the neighborhood I had once considered too quiet to notice. I knocked on doors I hadn't approached in years, spoke to people I had once waved at from my porch but never really knew. Mrs. Klein from 2 houses down remembered our conversations about politics last month. Mr. Harlan the mailman had delivered to me for 5 years and wrote a letter describing my regular interactions, my routines, how I'd always been sharp, friendly, coherent. My former pharmacist confirmed I refilled my own medications without assistance. Even the local librarian, young, probably 25, agreed to write a statement. "You come in every week," she said, "ask for historical biographies, argue about Lincoln. You're more coherent than most people my age." These were lifelines, thin strands of truth I could wrap around myself like armor. Martin compiled everything into a formal response to the conservatorship petition, attaching the statements, the evaluation, the evidence of banking fraud we'd uncovered, withdrawals I never made, account changes never authorized. We filed it the next morning. It would be reviewed by the judge in a preliminary hearing set for 10 days later. 10 days. I had to live through 10 days with the knowledge that my own child was actively seeking to have me stripped of personhood. I barely slept. I triple-checked my locks. I spoke aloud to Marianne in the quiet of the house, asking her what we had done wrong, if it was something in our parenting, some flaw of softness, of leniency, that had allowed this monstrosity to grow in the shape of our son. But in those days of darkness, something else also emerged: resolve. A different version of myself began to stir. the teacher. The man who once stood in front of bored teenagers and demanded they remember what had come before them. Who insisted that every action has consequence, every betrayal a legacy. I would not be erased. I would not be rewritten into a man I was not. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed in my best suit, pressed navy wool, the one I had worn at Mary Ann's funeral. I stood straight, shaved carefully, polished my shoes until I saw myself in them. I was not going to court as a victim. I was going as a man whose life was worth defending. We arrived early. The courtroom was cold, wood-paneled, quiet except for the faint shuffle of papers and low murmurs. Jeffrey and Lisa sat across the aisle, dressed in black like mourners at a funeral they were orchestrating. Lisa didn't look at me. Jeffrey gave me a stiff nod. Nothing more. The judge, an older black woman with keen eyes and a voice like carved granite, reviewed both petitions. She listened first to Lisa, who spoke smoothly about concern, about incidents, about safety. She described me as increasingly erratic, said I had accused them of theft, paranoia, even violence, claims she said were unfounded, but sadly consistent with cognitive decline. Jeffrey nodded solemnly, playing the burdened son. They were convincing, practiced, sympathetic in their performance. Then Martin rose and presented our evidence. He handed in Dr. Brenner's evaluation, the sworn statements from community members, the banking records. He laid out our timeline, our theory, our defense. He spoke with quiet authority, never dramatic, just deliberate. Then, the judge asked me to speak. My throat tightened. I stood, hands at my side, and said, "Your Honor, I am 76 years old. I've made mistakes like any man, but I am not incompetent. I manage my affairs. I live alone. I read, cook, think, vote. I signed a power of attorney to help my son once, not to surrender my life. They told me I should stay quiet and obey, that it would be easier, but easier for whom? Not for me, for them. I have no criminal record, no history of dementia, only a house full of memories and a bank account that's been bleeding in my sleep. I am asking this court not just for dignity, I am asking it to see me." I sat down. The judge nodded slowly, then recessed for lunch. When we returned, she denied the conservatorship petition, citing insufficient evidence of incapacity, and stated that the matter of financial impropriety may merit separate investigation. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just exhaled, deep, shaking, silent. The worst had passed, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Not by a long shot. The court's rejection of the conservatorship petition was a turning point, but not the kind of ending one might expect. It didn't bring relief, at least not the kind that stayed. It was a brief reprieve, a pause between waves, because I understood, perhaps for the first time with complete clarity, that this was not a misunderstanding, not a misguided attempt to help. This was war, and my son had declared it. Not with fists, not with open threats, but with paperwork, signatures, fabrications, and a smile that had become more knife than gesture. After the hearing, I did not return to Clarksville immediately. Martin advised me to remain in Nashville for a few days while we sorted out next steps, both legal and financial. I checked into a modest hotel near his office, a place that smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon cleaner, and spent hours in the lobby going over every document I had, every detail of the case. Martin had begun the process of filing to officially revoke the power of attorney and to freeze all joint financial accounts pending investigation. I gave him full access to my records, passwords, everything. In turn, he promised to move quickly, though his face betrayed the weariness of a man who had seen too many of these cases end in silence and resignation. That evening, while eating a dinner of overcooked salmon and cold green beans in the hotel restaurant, I received a phone call from my bank's fraud department. A new attempt had been made to access one of my brokerage accounts. One I hadn't touched since Marianne died. One I had nearly forgotten existed. Someone had tried to initiate a wire transfer for $45,000 to an unfamiliar account. The transfer was flagged and held. I thanked the agent and instructed them to block all access, then called Martin immediately. "They're getting desperate," he said grimly. "We need to move on the real estate next. What's the status of the house your name is on?" And there it was, the part of the story I had put off confronting, even to myself. 8 months prior, before any of this chaos began, Jeffrey had approached me with a request. He and Lisa were planning to purchase a new home in a more affluent suburb, closer to Lisa's work, with better schools, even though Sophie was practically out the door. They needed help with the down payment. He said they had nearly everything covered but were short by $50,000. "Just a loan, Dad," he had said. "We'll pay it back. Or better yet, we'll put your name on the house. You'll be a co-owner. That way it's like a shared family investment." I remember him saying the words, "It'll always be partly yours," like he was offering a seat at the table of a life I had long been excluded from. I agreed. I wrote the check. We signed papers in a real estate office in Franklin, and I didn't read them closely. I trusted him. Now, sitting in that hotel room, the realization settled over me with awful clarity. If I was legally a co-owner of that house, if my name was on the deed, then I had rights, property rights. And if I had rights, then maybe, just maybe, I had leverage. I called Martin and told him everything. He instructed me to come to his office first thing in the morning with any documents I had related to the house. The next day, after reviewing the copies I had kept and making a few calls, he confirmed it. "You're on the deed," he said, tapping the page with a pen. "1/3 owner, jointly held. That means nothing can be done with this property. No refinancing, no sale, without your consent." I felt something deep in my chest crack open. It wasn't joy. It was vindication, brittle and sharp. "So what does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Martin said, "you can force a sale. It's messy, and it'll go to court if they resist, but it's possible. If you're ready for that." I didn't hesitate. Do it. We filed the petition that afternoon to initiate a partition action, legal proceedings that would either result in the voluntary sale of the property and equitable division of the proceeds, or, if contested, a forced sale through court order. It would take time, but the papers had been served. I knew it would take them by surprise. I knew it would strike at the very core of the illusion they had built, that I was powerless, voiceless, irrelevant. That night, back in Clarksville, I returned to my quiet house and found the air changed. It was still, but not peaceful. The phone rang 3 times over the next hour, Lisa's number blinking on the caller ID. I didn't answer. Then came the text messages. "What are you doing? We need to talk. You're making a mistake. Call us." I deleted them without reading the rest. 2 days later, Lisa appeared at my door unannounced. This time she didn't come inside. She stood on the porch in high heels and a tight blazer, her face composed like a woman used to winning. "Gerald," she began, "this is absurd. You're trying to destroy your own family. Over what? A house?" I said nothing. I wanted to see what else she had rehearsed. "We gave you everything," she continued. "Visits, support, help, and now you're threatening to evict us?" Still, I said nothing. She narrowed her eyes. You don't understand the consequences. If this goes public, Sophie will find out. You really want her to see this side of you? The vindictive, paranoid version? That stung. She saw it in my face. She pressed harder. We know what this is really about. Control, pride. You can't stand that you're not the center of things anymore. Well, this won't go the way you think. We'll fight it. You'll lose. I stared at her, studied the lines on her face, the confidence brittle around the edges, and finally replied, "Then fight, but don't come here again." The legal process began to unfold. Appraisers visited the Franklin house. Realtors contacted Martin. Letters went back and forth between attorneys. Jeffrey finally responded through counsel, calling the sale an aggressive and destabilizing act. They refused to cooperate. The case moved toward court. Meanwhile, I changed my will. I revoked any inheritance Jeffrey or Lisa might have received. I added a clause that in the event of my death, a charitable trust would receive the proceeds of any litigation. I left Sophie a letter, not a legal document, just something personal, something honest. I didn't know if she would ever see it or care, but I wrote it anyway. Then came the attempt at public embarrassment. Lisa arranged a wellness check through Adult Protective Services, anonymously, of course, alleging neglect, isolation, and possible self-harm. 2 agents showed up one morning, polite but firm, asking to come inside, asking if I had food, medication, any injuries. I cooperated fully. I showed them the pantry, the bathroom, my prescriptions, the tidy living room. One of them nodded. "You seem fine, Mr. Finch. Sorry for the inconvenience." I asked who filed the complaint. They shrugged. Anonymous. But if I had to guess, I didn't ask again. Around that time, Martin discovered that a separate attempt had been made to access a long-dormant life insurance policy in my name. The beneficiary had been quietly changed 6 months prior, from Mary Ann's name, which had never been updated after her passing, to a new entry, Jeffrey Finch. The signature authorizing the change was dated 3 days after I had undergone outpatient surgery for a benign growth, during a period when I had been under heavy sedation. I didn't remember signing anything. Martin filed a formal fraud complaint with the insurer and had the policy frozen. "They're squeezing every possible outlet," he said. "This isn't just about care, it's about consolidation. They're trying to preempt your independence by making you vanish piece by piece." Still, I didn't fold. I appeared for every court date, gave every statement, cooperated with every investigator. We pushed for discovery. We requested communication records, bank statements, transaction histories. Piece by piece, the facade they had built began to crack. Meanwhile, I began preparing for a different kind of exit. I contacted a real estate agent in a different part of the state, a quiet, wooded town near the border, where no one knew my name. I looked at rental properties, small apartments, nothing fancy, just enough to live simply. I changed my phone number, set up a new email, transferred my prescriptions to a different pharmacy. I began to disappear from the version of life they believed they controlled. Then the call came. A buyer had made an offer on the Franklin house, above market rate cash, ready to close. We presented it to the court as proof of fair market value. Lisa and Jeffrey, through their lawyer, refused. The court set a final hearing. There, in that polished courtroom, I listened as they painted me as a bitter, senile old man clinging to revenge. Their attorney argued I was trying to punish them for caring too much. Martin stood and delivered our final response with calm precision, reciting the timeline, the fraud, the evidence of manipulation, and then presented the buyer's notarized offer. The judge, reviewing the documentation, ruled in our favor. The property would be sold. The proceeds divided. If Jeffrey and Lisa did not vacate within 60 days, eviction proceedings would begin. They left the courtroom before I did. I saw Lisa's face for only a moment as they passed. It was not rage I saw, but disbelief. Shattered entitlement. Outside, under the wide Tennessee sky, I stood still for a long time, watching clouds roll in from the west. It wasn't victory I felt. It wasn't peace. It was something more difficult. The confirmation that blood could turn against you, and still you had to keep standing. The official ruling to force the sale of the house did not end the matter as cleanly as I had hoped. Legal victory and emotional closure are not the same thing. In the weeks following the decision, the silence from Jeffrey and Lisa was total. Not a call, not a message, not even an angry voicemail, which somehow made their absence feel more loaded than any shouting match could have. Their lawyer informed Martin that they intended to review their options, but in practical terms, they had run out of them. The buyer, an investment firm specializing in rental properties, had already submitted the payment to the court's escrow account, contingent only on the property being vacated. Notices were sent, deadlines passed. Then, just a week before the court-approved eviction would begin, they responded. It wasn't through any formal filing. They came in person. I was returning from a morning walk around the lake in the new neighborhood I had moved to, a quiet little apartment complex on the edge of nowhere, surrounded by aging trees and silence so deep you could hear the soft click of your own bones. Settling, when I saw the black SUV parked by the curb. For a moment, I thought it was a coincidence. Then I saw her, Lisa, leaning against the hood of the car, arms crossed, face unreadable. Jeffrey sat inside, staring ahead, his hands on the wheel like a man waiting for a train to hit him. I approached slowly, not out of fear but caution. I had not seen them in person since the court hearing. I had imagined many scenarios, apologies, accusations, tears, but the stillness in Lisa's face gave nothing away. She stood up straight as I drew near and said without preamble, "We want to talk." I didn't answer, just nodded and led them to the small bench near the apartment's entrance. Lisa sat. Jeffrey stayed standing for a moment, then reluctantly followed. The silence stretched. Finally she spoke. "We lost everything. The house, the money, the job." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She continued. "Jeffrey's firm let him go after the fraud complaint became public. It didn't matter that the case was dropped. The stain was enough. The buyer who purchased the house, he's turning it into a rental. We were forced to move into a 2-bedroom apartment in a part of town we'd always said we'd never live in. Sophie barely speaks to us. She found out everything. She read your letter." My heart flinched, but I didn't let it show. "And?" I asked. Lisa hesitated. She says we disgust her. That she never knew we were capable of this. Jeffrey shifted in his seat, eyes rimmed red but dry. "We didn't think it would go this far," he said quietly. "We thought you'd just go along with it. That it would be easier for everyone. We didn't realize how much we were hurting you." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to see my son again. Not the manipulator, not the coward, but the boy I taught to ride a bike, who once cried when a bird fell from its nest. But that boy wasn't here. This was a man who had systematically dismantled my life because it was convenient. "You knew what you were doing," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You forged documents. You tried to declare me incompetent. You stole from me, lied to Sophie, gaslighted me until I thought I was losing my mind." Jeffrey nodded slowly. I know. And I don't expect forgiveness. He faltered. Lisa picked up. "We need help," she said. The words landed like stones. "What kind of help?" I asked. "Financial," she said bluntly. "We have debts, credit cards, legal fees, back rent. We're drowning, Gerald." And there it was. The real reason for the visit. Not apology, not reconciliation. A final attempt to extract value from the man they'd tried to bury. "After everything," I said, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice, "you still think you can ask me for money?" Lisa didn't blink. "You have it?" "We don't. You don't need much at your age. You have no one left. We're your family." The cruelty of it was not in what she said, but in how calmly she said it, as though it were logic, as though the past year had been an awkward misunderstanding instead of a calculated betrayal. "No," I said, "just that." One word. Final. Solid. "You think because I'm old, I'll cave. You think because I'm alone, I'll compromise. But I have peace now, and I will not trade it for your redemption." Lisa's face darkened. "You're going to die alone, Gerald, with no family, no one to sit beside you. Is that what you want?" I looked her in the eye and replied, "I already did. I already buried the version of you I loved. I already buried my illusions. What's left is clean, and you can't touch it." Jeffrey's head sank. Lisa stood abruptly. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "No," I said again. "I regret only that I didn't stop you sooner." They walked away. I didn't watch them go. Back in my apartment, I made tea and sat by the window, looking out at the trees bending under the breeze. I thought of Sophie, of the letter she had read, of the silence that still stretched between us. I didn't know if she would ever come. I didn't know if I would ever hold her hand again. But I knew one thing. I had taken back my name, my voice, my dignity. I had made them listen. And for a man they wanted to erase. That was everything. The seasons changed with a kind of quiet finality, the way they do when no one is watching. Summer faded, not with the fireworks and cookouts of youth, but with long shadows on the pavement, earlier sunsets, and the hush of leaves drying at the edges. In my small apartment, life settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar at first, but gradually became my own. Early mornings with strong coffee, long walks by the lake, the soft hum of classical music on a second-hand radio. I kept my days simple. I had no grand projects, no 5-year plans, no need to prove anything. After decades of service to family, school, neighbors, and the endless expectations of being useful, I was finally learning how to be free. And freedom at my age is not a gallop, but a slow, deliberate walk away from the noise that once defined you. Martin helped me finalize all the necessary changes: a fully revised will, a legal trust to protect my remaining assets from further predation, and a letter of intent specifying my medical and burial wishes. There was comfort in that. Control. Clarity. I had taken back every piece of my life they tried to amputate. The forced sale of the Franklin house closed without incident. The funds were divided by court order, and I placed my share into a protected account. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. My needs were few. I bought a used car, modest, reliable. I stocked my pantry with the basics. I subscribed to the local paper and began volunteering once a week at the nearby community library, helping kids with reading and retirees with computers. No one knew who I had been. No one asked. And that was the greatest mercy of all. One Saturday morning in late October, while organizing the reference section, a voice behind me said, "Grandpa?" I turned, and there she was, Sophie. Not a girl anymore, a young woman taller than I remembered, her hair cut shorter, face drawn, but clear. She didn't smile right away. She just stood there, hands in the pockets of her coat, eyes searching mine. I nodded slowly. "Hi," I said. She stepped forward and hugged me, tentative at first, then tighter. We didn't speak for a long time. We didn't need to. Later, we walked to a bench outside and sat under a maple tree shedding its last red leaves. She told me she had transferred colleges, changed her major, broken up with someone. She said she found my letter tucked inside a stack of old mail at the apartment, read it 3 times, cried, got angry, then cried again. She said she didn't know what to believe for a long time because they had lied so smoothly, so consistently. But eventually, the facts piled up, and when she confronted her parents, they didn't deny it. They just called it a difficult time. She said she didn't want to be like them. She said she was sorry for not calling sooner. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. That truth comes to people at different speeds, and what mattered was that she came at all. We sat there for hours. She told me she missed the domino cities, the ducks at the park, the way I made stories out of history like it all still mattered. She asked if we could start over. I told her we already had. She began visiting every weekend after that. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat. She brought cookies she baked herself, books she thought I'd like, stories from her classes. I didn't ask about Jeffrey or Lisa, neither did she. There was nothing left to say about them. In late November, the library held a community night where volunteers could share something, a reading, a memory, a skill. I read a passage from Steinbeck about dignity and aging, about how the old still burn with life even when the world forgets them. When I looked up, Sophie was in the front row, her eyes wet. Afterward, she hugged me and whispered, "I'm proud of you." That moment meant more than any courtroom win, more than any check or house or legal document. Because in the end, that's what we fight for. Not the assets, not even the justice, but the chance to be seen clearly by someone who matters. The chance to rewrite the final chapter with honesty, not silence. And so I live. Not triumphant, but intact. Not restored, but resolute. I am not the man they tried to define. I am not the version they buried in paperwork and false kindness. I am Gerald Finch. I taught history. I buried a good woman. I was betrayed by my blood, and I found my voice too late to save the past, but just in time to reclaim the present. That is enough. That, finally, is mine.